Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now it's time for our latest Brexplainer session, where our experts explain some of the big outstanding issues in negotiations and answer your questions on Brexit. Sunrise's political correspondent Tamara Cohen is in Westminster and Sky's Europe correspondent Mark Stone is in Brussels. Before we get down to the questions, let's get your view on where we are right now. Let's start with Tamara. Bring us up to date with everything that's been happening.
Hi, Julian. Well, the big news of the week is essentially that Theresa May has now opened the door to delaying Brexit. So under pressure from ministers, including cabinet ministers, she has now agreed that if her deal, which she's bringing back to Parliament at some point in the next 2 weeks, doesn't get through, there will then be a vote in Parliament on whether MPs actively want no deal, and we're pretty sure that they don't actively want that. There will then be a vote on whether they want to delay Brexit, so we wouldn't leave on the 29th of March as scheduled, we would leave at some later point. Theresa May says any extension would have to be short, would have to be limited, would not interfere with the European elections which are going on this summer, but of course it's not just her call. The other EU 27 countries would have to agree to it, and they might have other ideas. So that is high risk, has caused a lot of controversy in the Tory party. Meanwhile, on the Labour side, Labour have made a big shift to now supporting a second referendum. But for those getting excited about the prospect of a second referendum potentially staying in the EU, at the current moment, there is not a majority in Parliament to make that happen.
And Mark, your turn. Bring us up to date with what's been happening in Brussels this week.
Well, while Mrs May has conceded that there is the option of perhaps delaying Brexit, she's given MPs that option, she is still working for her deal to pass, and to do that she needs to be able to allow, well, both sides need to be able to somehow change or tweak the withdrawal agreement to put in further legal reassurances that that thing called the backstop that we've talked about so many times before is not never-ending, doesn't lock the UK to the EU in perpetuity. Now, to do that, her Attorney General, Geoffrey Cox, has been in and out of Brussels for the past few weeks. He was here again this week for what we thought would be a slightly longer meeting than it was. It only lasted a couple of hours in the end. He was there and back in the same afternoon, trying to secure those legal changes to the withdrawal agreement in order that he can change his legal advice and declare the backstop is no longer the problem he thought it was back in December. If he could do that, then the deal can pass, that could go back to Westminster. There is then still a question over whether enough MPs back in Westminster would pass that deal.
OK, let's jump into the first question from Twitter, and this one is from Alex. He says, or actually it's she, I'm not sure. If the PM's deal does not pass through the House on the 12th, no deal fails on the 13th, then an extension passes on the 14th, only for the EU a week or so later to say no to an extension because there is no valid reason for it, what will happen? Tamara?
Well, this is the £1 billion or £39 billion question. If nothing works out, if there is a majority for nothing, I would say a couple of things. First of all, there is generally a sense that the EU would agree some kind of extension to avoid no deal. That is not a certainty, but the general feeling is that they would agree, but that it could be a very long one and therefore not palatable back in Westminster. So that is one possibility. There's also a possibility that, of course, MPs don't vote for an extension. They don't want no deal and they don't want an extension. I think that is really very unlikely, because if MPs don't vote for the Brexit deal, then they will probably want more time to work out something else. I think the view in the EU would be that they would only like to see an extension if they think that there's going to be a dramatic change of course, i.e. Theresa May isn't just going to keep coming back to MPs with the same thing, saying, please, can you vote for it this time, but actually does something different, like, for example, says to the Labour Party, we will agree with you on a closer economic relationship, a customs union, for example, and go down that track. Not clear that Theresa May, who's ruled that out thus far, would ever do that. But yes, there is an accidental risk of Brexit happening on the 29th if MPs either don't vote for or don't get that delay. But I think at that stage, Theresa May's government would really be in a crisis, and MPs in Parliament, most of whom do not want no deal, would probably seek a way to try and take control of the process themselves.
OK, this next one to you, Mark, from at John Brown 1325, who says, EU leaders say a short extension to Article 50 would have to have a specific objective. How likely are they to approve such a request if that's the outcome of the vote on the 14th of March? And if the WA passes in March, will we realistically need an extension anyway to pass necessary legislation?
Yeah, the WA he refers to there is the withdrawal agreement that I was talking about. There are two things here. If Mrs May's deal does pass in Westminster, if she secures those legal changes that her Attorney General is trying to get this week in Brussels, then I think the consensus is that there would still have to be an extension to Article 50. So let's assume that she gets the deal passed, that it goes through next week on the Monday or the Tuesday, whenever she said the vote would be. That then leaves a very short amount of time between that date and March the 29th in order to push through what's known as the Withdrawal Agreement Bill, the WAB, as it's known in Westminster, and to a larger degree here as well. Now, that isn't simply enough time. This sort of legislation usually takes around about 2 weeks. There's something called ping-pong between the House of Lords and the House of Commons, and so there won't be enough time. So she's likely, even if she gets the deal through, to then ask for a short extension. In that scenario, I see absolutely no prospect of the EU saying no, because there would be light at the end of the tunnel. There would be a genuine reason for wanting a few more weeks to be able to extend the Article 50 process to get the legislation sorted. There is, and it would probably run up until either the end of May, which is when the European elections begin, or perhaps the beginning of July, which is when the new Parliament sits. So that would be no problem. There's a separate question if her deal doesn't go through, and then the British Parliament votes for an extension to Article 50, which they clearly need if the deal doesn't go through and they don't want no deal on the 29th of March. Now, on the face of it, the likes of Emmanuel Macron, the French president, are playing hardball and say, no, we need a specific reason for an extension. I think in reality there is pretty much zero prospect of them turning around and saying, no, you can't have an extension. And the reason for that is that they wouldn't want to be seen to be the people who prevented or facilitated a no-deal cliff edge withdrawal, which is what they would see it as. The other thing to consider is that neither side is ready for no deal. The British side, it's evident, is not ready. They've pretty much admitted as much. And while the EU side, individual countries say, yeah, we're ready, we can deal with no deal, they're not really. They're not really as ready as they'd like to be. And so I think in any scenario, an extension to Article 50, if Mrs May seeks it, will be granted by the 27 remaining members of the EU.
And Tamara, in terms of a no deal, just how much preparation has there been on the part of the government if this is the eventual scenario?
Well, we learnt a lot more about that this week, Gillian, and although the governments say they really don't want to delay Brexit, I think in reality they wouldn't be devastated, because if you speak to anyone in Whitehall who's working on this, they are not ready for no deal, despite the government always saying that they would be. There was a report that the government itself put out on Tuesday, an update about how ready they are for no deal, and they said that of their most critical projects, a third of them are not ready. There was another report by MPs this week, particularly on the issue of borders, because you'll need computer systems, not just for people and for goods, but also for checks on plants and foods, and all these things are simply not ready, the report found. So I think a bit more time would certainly be appreciated from the UK side. There are also concerns that the preparations being done by individuals and businesses are nowhere near ready, that small businesses don't know that they have to do their customs declarations if we leave without a deal on 29th, or know it but haven't actually done it yet. And in terms of ordinary people like you and I, people seem to be not aware that they need to get an international driving permit if they want to drive to Europe this summer if there is no deal. Obviously, if there is a deal, they would have more time to prepare for that. And on issues like healthcare, for example, if you've got an e-hit card, there are 27 million e-hit cards that have been issued in the UK. That would not work after we leave if we leave with no deal. So you need to get travel insurance to ensure that you're not paying a lot of money for healthcare. So I think there's general concern that not only individuals aren't ready, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more adverts on TV and radio about the implications of no deal over the next couple of weeks, but also that the government systems themselves aren't quite ready yet.
Yeah, much talk about how a no deal could hit the UK. But Mark, what are the possible implications for the EU 27 of a no deal?
Well, I mean, there is a bit of good news for expats, Brits living abroad. There are, well over 1 million Brits who live across continental Europe. They've been very, very worried about the prospect of what Brexit means for them, and increasingly worried about what no deal means. What we've seen happening in certain situations is that individual countries are now realising that they need to guarantee the rights of Brits living abroad, not least because the UK seems to have guaranteed the rights of their citizens living in the UK, but because it could affect their economies as well. Think of Spain, where many, many British people either holiday or live. And yesterday, I think, in fact, it's being given royal assent in Spain today. The government there has announced that up until, even in the event of no deal, up until the end of 2020, Brits living there or Brits holidaying there will still have access to Spanish healthcare. This is a big deal. It's something that would have been that people would have been very, very concerned about. What we're seeing in certain areas is mini deals being done to mitigate against the difficulties of no deal. Now, that will lead some to say, well, hang on a minute, why do we need to have a deal then? We could just leave with no deal and lots of mini deals will be done. I think that is not the way to look at it, because only in certain key areas will mini deals are mini deals being done, and they're only being done for a short period of time, just to mitigate against that cliff edge. So a broader deal, I think, is clearly the most sensible way forward, and that is what Mrs May, in her own way, with her own type of deal that many people don't like, is trying to get over the line. OK, Mark and Tamara, thank you both. We hope that today's Brexplainer has gone some way to answering some of your questions.